Afternoon. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad you joined us again. I have out my big red pot, and that usually means soup around here. So I'm going to make one of our favorite soups, Posole. And what I'm going to make is our version of Posole. It may not be authentic, but it's mighty darn good. So let's start with the ingredients. One of the reasons I like Posole so much is because if you're in our canning group, Safe Canning by the Book on Debbie's Back Porch, you know, I always talk about canning ingredients and not trying to can a meal. And so I can ingredients, and this particular soup uses a lot of my canned ingredients, and it also uses leftovers. So it's a very economical soup. I cooked a Boston butt last night, and so I have about 2 cups of leftover Boston butt chopped up. I have an onion chopped. I have 2 cups, a little bit over 2 cups, but that's what I had, of already cooked beans. This recipe generally calls for white beans, but I have Anasazi beans that we had for a meal, and I don't want to waste them. I'm going to use them. I also have a quart of home canned tomatoes. I have a pint of home canned salsa. If you watched my videos, you may have seen me make this salsa. The reason I have salsa is because the recipe actually calls for peppers, and this time of year I don't have fresh peppers. And so I have a lot of peppers in this salsa, and the other ingredients are compatible, so I'm going to use it. But if you have fresh peppers, peppers of your choice, hot, mild, bell, whatever, you should use them. I have here a pint of hominy, and yes, that is home canned hominy. And I know some folks tell you that it's not safe to can hominy, but the National Center for Home Food Preservation has a recipe for making and canning hominy safely, and I made this hominy from organic corn, and then I canned it. I have here, excuse me, that's Bessie. You know, she's being fierce today. I have 2 pints of turkey broth that I canned, bone broth. This is extra special good with ham broth. I don't often have ham broth. Any kind of broth will do. If you have pork broth, that's perfect too, because this is a pork soup. I also have 2 tablespoons full of garlic. I have it. Sorry, Fred was bringing me something. I already have it. 2 tablespoons full of garlic, minced garlic, and then I have some turmeric and some cumin seed, along with my normal stick of butter. So there's a lot of ingredients in this, but most of these ingredients are either leftovers or canned items that I put up during the summer. So very economical soup and so tasty. Let's get to it. Okay, I have my stick of butter in my big red pan. This is a Lodge enameled cast iron pan, by the way, which I love to use. And as with most soups that I make, we start with a flavor base. We don't just put all the ingredients together. So in my butter, I'm going to put my 1 chopped up onion. And my 2 tablespoons full of garlic. Now, if I were adding fresh peppers, I would add them now as a part of the flavor base. If you want to add mushrooms, I'm not putting mushrooms in this soup, but mushrooms are a good option. If you'd like to add some, now is the time to add those too. You may have picked up on the fact that when I start cooking, I don't actually have a recipe. I have a general idea in mind, and whatever recipe I read to learn how to do this to start with, I have adapted to the foods we have on hand, to things that are seasonal, to things that are available organically, and things that I can make. So if you go back and you find a traditional Posole recipe, I'm sorry, Bessie just won't stop. If you go back and find a traditional Posole recipe, it'll be a little bit different than this, because this is a recipe that's adapted. And I have an idea that most home canners probably can the same things I have and have the same ingredients, with the possible exception of the hominy. And boy, I tell you, it takes dedication to do hominy. It's a 2 or 3 day process, but I just don't like buying hominy in the can, because it's all from genetically modified corn, and I really try not to buy things with that. So I'm not a fanatic about it, but I certainly try to avoid it because of the use of pesticides and herbicides on genetically modified crops, and so I try to avoid it. That's why I don't use canola oil or corn oil. So I'm letting that simmer. Until we get the flavors of the onions and the garlic letting go, and it does smell wonderful. Now I'm going to add to that a little bit of seasoning. And if you don't have cumin, a lot of people don't have cumin, I suggest you go get some. It's a wonderful addition to many things, and it's sort of the flavor that makes Posole Posole. You don't have to use a lot, but it's one thing that you need for it to be Posole. And that was a half a teaspoonful. Cumin is one of those things that a little bit of it is wonderful, and a lot of it can just be overpowering. So I use it often but sparingly. And that is a half a teaspoonful of turmeric. And then I'm going to put a teaspoonful of salt. I don't know, I'll show you this. I don't know if you've ever noticed. I keep my salt in a little jar with, and this is a half-pint jelly jar, and that's a peanut butter lid. And the reason I keep it that way is because I use canning and kosher salt, and for most of the time, and they don't have anti-caking ingredients, and so I end up reaching in with a spoon to measure my salt instead of shaking. And that's about a 1/4 teaspoonful of red pepper flakes. I didn't mention salt and pepper in the ingredient list, but there you go. Doesn't it have a lovely color? And if you were here, you would know it has a lovely smell too. So, now I'm going to add the pint of salsa. As I said, if you're using fresh peppers, you would have already added them. But this is National Center's Choice Salsa. It has lots of peppers in it. And while we don't just eat a lot of salsa, I use salsa on things. I mean, chips and dips, not something we do a lot, but salsa is good as a side dish. If you're serving a roasted meat, salsa is good. It's great in an omelet. So to me, salsa is an ingredient more than it is a dip. And I had a good many, I had jalapenos and bell peppers. You can see I made a video. It's called Safe Canning Salsa, I think. If you want to see what's in the salsa, it's yummy. So we're going to let this heat up a little bit and let those flavors meld before we put the rest of the ingredients in, and I'll be right back. You can see it's bubbling away. Now I'm going to add more ingredients. Here's a quart of my home canned tomatoes. And I generally can tomatoes hot pack crushed. But it doesn't matter however you canned your tomatoes. As long as they were canned by a safe recipe, they can go right in here. I'm going to add my hominy. And this was made with yellow corn, so it's kind of dark. And I tell you, homemade hominy, it's good. It is a lot of trouble, but someday I may be up to making a video to show you how to do it. You don't have to use lye. The recipe on the National Center for Home Food Preservation's website uses baking soda, and it takes a little bit longer with baking soda than it would with lye, but I'm just not up to using lye and prefer not to. So you can do it with, you can buy organic corn in small quantities on the internet, and baking soda is cheap, and hominy takes a couple days, but it's really worth the trouble if you like hominy, and because we do like hominy with smoked sausages and sauerkraut. It's really very good. So we're going to let this come to a boil. And I'm going to add, this is already cooked pork. There are people in our front yard, and she believes that she has to protect us from them. So that's what's going on with the little dog. Then I have the 2 cups of beans. Now traditionally this recipe would call for cannellini beans. They're big white beans. You could use navy beans. You could use Great Northern beans. I've used almost any kind of beans in this, particularly like small red beans. These are Anasazi beans. They're a heritage bean. We grow them, and we love them. And they're a very mild, almost a buttery taste, milder than, say, pinto beans. So I almost always have some Anasazi beans, and we probably eat them once a week. Beans are good for you. Then I'm adding my home canned bone broth. And I know you think I'm going to overrun this big old pot, but I'm not. Because that's it. Now, if you look down in there, this is a very ingredient-rich soup. And the flavors are a little bit different than normally, because, say, normal vegetable soup, vegetable beef soup. The cumin and the turmeric gives you just a little bit different flavor. And the mixture of tomatoes and broth adds a richness that many soups don't have. So I have this up on a high heat. As soon as it starts to boil, I'm going to turn it down to medium, and I'm going to let it simmer for about an hour. It would be done before that, but if you let it simmer for about an hour on a fairly low heat, then you get a richness of flavor from the flavors melding together. And so I recommend you go ahead and give it that hour if you have that amount of time. I'll be back. Just thought I'd check in and let you see this simmering away. It's been cooking about 15 minutes and I've turned it down low. Going to cover it back up, but oh, you can really smell the richness of this. I can't wait. Be back in a bit. Here you go. It's ready to serve. I'm going to plate this up with my corn fritters and get ready for dinner. Be right back. Well, this is a dinner fit for a king or a queen or a domestic goddess. Whoever. It's just luscious. I tasted it to make sure it didn't need more salt or anything. And this is rich, full of ingredients, lots of good stuff, and it has a really hearty flavor. I serve it with a corn fritter, and that's all it needs. Nice glass of sweet tea would work. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. Try Posole. It is a very, very inexpensive meal, but it tastes very rich. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.